today's mindful moment, packed with insights but designed to fit into your busy life. One deep dive at a time. We often think about stuff that happens online like it's all in its own little world, totally separate from real life.
Right.
But what if all the, bad stuff,
Yeah.
all the toxic ideologies that are brewing in these online spaces, especially the ones that are steeped in misogyny?
Right.
What if those are actually shaping how people are thinking and acting in the real world?
That's a great question, and it's something we really need to unpack because
Yeah.
this deep dive is really going to examine how these digital communities, these online spaces, are having an actual real-world impact.
A real tangible impact, and I think that's what's so important to look at.
Absolutely.
So jumping right in,
Yeah.
I think it's crucial to understand that right from the start, that we're not talking about just these tiny little isolated groups of, extremists
Exactly.
hiding in the dark corners of the internet.
Yeah, and the source material we're looking at today, Laura Bates's book, Men Who Hate Women.
Yeah, great book.
It really reveals that there's this deeply interconnected network of online communities.
Right.
Collectively, we refer to this as the manosphere.
Yeah.
And what's really important to understand is that it has these significant ties to broader societal attitudes as well.
So it's not just happening in a vacuum.
Absolutely not.
It's bleeding out
It
into
bleeds out into
the real world.
the real world.
Okay.
Yeah, and Bates's work, it gives us this, really vital look inside these online spaces.
Yeah.
She details their specific language, the core beliefs,
Right.
and even more alarmingly, their links to real-world actions.
This is the scary part.
It is scary.
So, our mission here today is to really dissect these fundamental ideas that are driving these groups.
Yeah.
We want to explore how they're attracting and influencing individuals,
Right.
and then trace these distorting connections between their online rhetoric
Yeah,
and the acts of violence that we're seeing.
exactly.
And then also kind of uncover the subtle ways that these ideologies are sort of infiltrating mainstream thought.
Yes, because it's often very subtle.
Yeah, it's very insidious.
It is.
So one of the key questions that I think we need to address is how do we sort of reconcile this common perception that these groups are insignificant outliers
Right.
with the growing evidence suggesting that their reach and their influence is actually expanding in the real world?
Yeah, because at first glance, it's really easy to just dismiss these communities,
Right.
Like these small radical fringes on the internet.
Yep, just a bunch of, basement dwellers
Right, exactly.
who are never going to actually do anything.
Right.
But Bates's research
Yeah,
reveals a much more complex reality.
it does.
I mean, she really demonstrates how interconnected these groups are.
They are.
The ideas, the rhetoric is constantly flowing across various online platforms
Yeah.
and even into offline conversations.
Exactly, and that's the core insight here, I think.
Yeah.
That this illusion of isolation allows these ideologies to gain traction.
Right.
Because individuals can find these perceived like-minded communities. Right. It makes them feel less alone.
Less alone.
Invalidated.
And they're oftentimes very distorted worldviews.
Right, and it reinforces those distorted worldviews.
Yeah.
Which is really dangerous.
Yeah.
And we also need to talk about the nature of the content within these spaces.
Yeah.
Because it's truly disturbing. I mean, Bates presents these direct quotes from these online communities,
Yeah.
and you see these violent threats. You see this dehumanizing language directed at women,
Right.
and just this normalized acceptance of extreme misogyny
Right.
that is really, really chilling. And the sheer volumes and the intensity of this hatred,
Yeah.
including the threats that Bates herself received,
Yeah. It's terrifying.
it's scary.
I mean, she's brave to even go into these spaces.
She is incredibly brave
Yeah.
because it highlights this consistent pattern of violent rhetoric that goes way beyond simple disagreement.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
We're talking about graphic depictions of sexual violence,
Right.
threats against families. I mean, it's a sustained campaign of abuse.
It is a campaign of abuse.
So given this just absolutely disturbing level of hate,
Yeah.
how are these communities managing to attract new members?
Well, recruitment often targets individuals, particularly young men,
Right.
who are feeling marginalized, lonely, or disenfranchised.
Okay.
And these communities offer this really powerful sense of belonging and validation
Right.
for their frustrations, however unfounded they may be.
Right.
The allure is finding a space where their grievances are echoed and seemingly understood.
Right. So they're finding people who seem to get it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Bates introduces this concept of the red pill mentality,
Yes.
which is this idea that users are being shown like a hidden truth,
Right.
that society is rigged against men,
Yeah.
and that they're the actual victims in this so-called gynocracy.
Right, this idea that women are secretly controlling everything.
Well, exactly.
And men are being oppressed.
So the core insight here is that this red pill is like a powerful initial hook
It is.
that offers them a seemingly simple explanation for their complex personal frustrations.
Right.
And then it fosters this sense of shared, albeit distorted understanding.
Exactly. And it creates this us versus them mentality, which
Right.
can be very dangerous.
So it's like they're all in the know and everyone else is
Exactly.
the sheeple.
Yeah, the sheeple.
Okay.
Yeah, and the red pill also serves as this potent tool for radicalization.
Okay. How so?
Well, because it provides this simplistic framework,
Right,
for
like-
understanding these personal struggles, and it offers this sense of enlightenment to those who embrace it.
So they feel like they've finally woken up.
They've woken up to the truth.
Yeah.
And it creates that us versus them dynamic, which can be so dangerous.
Yeah. And to illustrate this, Bates uses this fictional example of Alex.
Yeah.
This young man who's feeling lost.
Yeah.
And he finds these online spaces.
Yeah, he stumbles upon them.
And initially, it's just this sense of community that draws him in.
Right, he's looking for connection.
But gradually, this constant exposure to these hateful messages
Yeah.
starts to really distort his perspective.
It warps his reality.
Right.
And it normalizes these extreme ideas within the group's shared worldview.
So it becomes his new normal.
It does.
That's scary.
And this normalization is a critical mechanism in radicalization.
Right.
Because as individuals are continually bombarded with this extremist content,
Yeah.
what initially seems shocking gradually becomes commonplace.
Right.
And even acceptable within the group's constructed reality.
So they kind of become desensitized to it.
They do.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a gradual process.
Yeah.
But it can be very effective.
This leads us to a particularly concerning segment of the manosphere.
Yeah.
The incel community.
Right.
Or what stands for involuntarily celibate.
Yeah.
And Bates identifies this as the most violently hateful segment of the manosphere.
Absolutely.
Entirely focused on hatred towards women.
Yes. And the incel ideology is characterized by this intense resentment towards women.
Okay.
And it's rooted in this belief that men are entitled to sexual relationships and that women are deliberately denying them those relationships.
Oh, wow. So it's not even just that they're not getting it, it's that they're being denied.
Exactly. They feel like it's a conscious choice that women are making to withhold sex from them.
That's intense.
It is. And this sense of entitlement and rejection,
Right.
it can tragically escalate into extreme violence
Right.
because they feel justified in their anger.
And Bates shares this devastating statistic
Yeah.
that over 100 people, predominantly women,
Yeah.
have been murdered or injured in the name of the incel community in the past decade,
In the past decade.
which is just horrifying.
It is horrifying.
That statistic, over 100 lives impacted by this online hatred,
Yeah.
really brings the offline consequences into stark reality.
It does.
Like, this isn't just some theoretical thing.
It's not theoretical. It
No,
is.
it's just having real-world consequences.
Real people are being hurt.
And the connection between this online rhetoric and real-world violence is undeniable.
It's undeniable.
Bates details specific cases like Elliot Rogers' Isla Vista killings,
Right.
Brian Isaac Clyde's attempted attack in Dallas, and the Toronto massage parlor murder,
Yeah.
all directly linked to incel ideology.
And what's really troubling is that despite the clearly extremist motivations in these cases,
Yeah.
terrorism charges have not been consistently applied.
Right.
So it raises this question.
Yeah.
Is the reluctance to label these acts as terrorism
Right.
simply a legal definition issue?
Okay.
Or does it point to a deeper societal bias in how we perceive ideologically motivated violence against women
Interesting.
compared to other forms of extremism?
So maybe we're not taking it as seriously as other forms of extremism.
Potentially.
Okay.
Yeah. And if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Okay.
this hesitation to classify these acts as terrorism might reflect a broader societal blind spot
Okay.
in recognizing and taking seriously violence against women as a form of ideologically driven extremism.
That's a really good point. So now the manosphere, as we've said, it's broader than just incel.
Much broader.
And Bates introduces us to these other groups like pickup artists,
Right. The PUAs.
the PUAs,
Yeah.
men's rights activists or MRAs,
Right.
and men going their own way or MGTOW.
The MGTOWs.
Right.
And while their specific approaches differ, a common thread of misogyny runs through them.
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating here is how each group,
Yeah,
in its own way, reinforces aspects of a patriarchal worldview
exactly.
and often views women with suspicion, resentment, or a sense of entitlement.
Yes, it's all about power and control.
Right.
And maintaining that traditional hierarchy.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about the differences between these groups.
Well, PUAs often emphasize male entitlement to sex
Okay.
and promote manipulative techniques to achieve it.
So it's all about getting women into bed.
Essentially, yes. And they view women as these objects to be conquered and manipulated.
But,
Whereas MRAs tend to focus on perceived anti-male bias, and they can engage in targeted online harassment.
so they're the ones who are going to, like, dox people and...
Exactly. They'll dox people. They'll send hateful messages. They'll try to ruin people's reputations.
Wow.
And then you have MGTOW.
Right.
And while they're seemingly about avoiding women,
Okay.
which on the surface might sound harmless,
Right.
it often stems from deeply misogynistic beliefs about women's inherent flaws.
So it's not really about avoiding women. It's about
It's about hating women
hating women.
and believing that they're inferior
Right.
and that they're dangerous.
Okay, so despite their differing tactics,
Right.
there's this shared underlying belief about women that often unites these groups.
Absolutely.
Then there's trolling,
Right.
which Bates explains isn't just online mischief.
No.
It's this deliberate tactic used by manosphere members
Yeah.
to shock, provoke, and harass,
Yes.
often with a specifically misogynistic aim.
Often, yes. And the
Yeah.
connection between this misogynistic trolling and the alt-right is significant.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because a lot of the techniques that are used to harass women online,
Okay.
like brigading,
Right.
which is basically, sending a swarm of hateful messages to someone.
Yeah.
And what's also known as astroturfing,
Right.
which is creating this false impression of widespread support for a particular viewpoint.
Okay.
These techniques were refined in manosphere spaces
Right.
and later adopted by far-right groups.
Oh, so they were kind of the pioneers of this.
In a way, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and Bates provides these disturbing examples like the coordinated abuse campaigns targeting Zoe Quinn and Anita Sarkeesian during Gamergate.
Right.
These weren't isolated incidents.
Right.
These were organized efforts to silence women in online spaces
Wow.
through intimidation and harassment.
So it was really about trying to push women out of these spaces.
Absolutely. And it was about reinforcing a particular ideological dominance.
Right. So they didn't want to let women have a voice in these spaces.
They did not.
Okay. So how do these manosphere ideologies start to permeate the mainstream?
Well, Bates outlines several concerning channels.
Okay.
For example, politicians.
Okay.
She points to instances where political rhetoric, even if not explicitly endorsing manosphere views,
Right.
aligns with their talking points,
Right.
such as comments about women in the workplace or the fear of false accusations.
Right.
And the concern here is that even implicit alignment can lend credence to manosphere narratives within broader public discourse.
Right, because it kind of normalizes it a little bit.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, and similarly, figures like Jordan Peterson,
Yeah.
while operating in an academic sphere,
Oh.
have generated debate about whether their ideas inadvertently normalize certain aspects of manosphere thinking
Interesting.
by framing societal issues in ways that resonate with these online communities.
Okay, so it's not that they're explicitly saying
Right.
we support these groups, but the way they're talking about things
The way they're framing the issues,
is kind of aligning with...
aligning with those ideologies,
Okay.
and then media figures also play a role. Bates discusses how media coverage, even when critical,
Right.
can sometimes amplify extremist voices or frame issues in ways that unintentionally align with manosphere narratives.
So, for example...
For example, disproportionately focusing on rare cases of false rape allegations,
Oh, okay.
which can inadvertently give undue attention to extremist viewpoints
Right.
and distort the perception of their prevalence.
Okay, so even when the media is trying to be critical,
Right.
they can accidentally be...
They can be inadvertently platforming these harmful ideologies
Right.
and giving them more attention than they deserve.
Okay.
And this contributes to the propagation of a fear narrative within the manosphere.
Okay, what is that?
This idea of male victimhood and this pervasive fear of false accusations,
Right.
despite statistical evidence to the contrary.
Statistically.
False rape allegations are incredibly rare,
Okay.
but this narrative is so pervasive within the manosphere,
Right.
and it can really seep out into the mainstream as well.
So it's creating this idea that men are constantly under threat of
Exactly.
being falsely accused.
Yes, and Bates uses the reactions to the hashtag Me Too movement as a prime example of how this narrative of male victimhood can penetrate mainstream consciousness.
Yeah.
Because you saw a lot of pushback against the hashtag Me Too movement
Right.
from people who were using this fear of false accusations
Right.
to discredit the movement and to silence women
Yeah.
who were coming forward with their stories.
So it's almost like a backlash.
It was a backlash
Yeah.
against the progress that was being made.
Okay.
And what's particularly alarming is the impact on younger generations.
Yeah, because they're so impressionable
They are.
at that age.
And Bates highlights how young people, especially boys,
Yeah.
are encountering and internalizing manosphere ideologies online
Through.
through memes, YouTube videos, social media.
Right.
It's everywhere.
They're being bombarded with it.
They are, and Bates even mentions a teacher's observations about students repeating manosphere arguments in class.
Oh, wow. So it's actually like coming out in their school.
It is, which indicates a significant level of exposure.
That's so scary.
It is scary.
Because, they're at such a formative age.
They are, and their brains are still developing.
Yeah.
And the digital landscape has become this key arena for shaping young minds.
Yeah. And this constant exposure to often subtly presented harmful ideas can significantly influence their developing views
Absolutely.
on gender and relationships.
And this underscores the need for greater media literacy
Right.
and critical thinking skills among young people to help them navigate these narratives.
Yeah, and this makes me think of YouTube channels like Mindful Moments,
Oh, yeah.
which is an AI audiobook analysis platform
Right.
that offers this valuable service by helping listeners critically examine and understand complex topics that are presented in audio form.
Yes, and that kind of critical engagement is particularly important when encountering potentially manipulative narratives online.
Absolutely.
Because you need to be able to dissect those arguments and see the flaws in the logic. And having resources that encourage critical analysis of online content
Yeah.
is crucial in countering the spread of harmful ideologies and fostering media literacy.
Yeah, because we can't just expect young people to know how to do this automatically.
No, they need guidance.
They need the tools.
You need the tools.
Okay.
And Bates then discusses how the widespread nature of misogyny and violence against women in society
Right.
can paradoxically make it harder to recognize online male supremacy as an extreme ideology.
It's like it's already so normalized
It is.
that this just seems like an extension of it,
Exactly.
rather than something totally separate and extreme.
And that's the danger.
Right, because it can fly under the radar.
It does.
Yeah, because unfortunately, in some ways, it can feel familiar.
It does.
So the normalization of misogyny in broader society creates a context where online male supremacy can appear as an extension of existing biases
Right.
rather than a radical departure.
Exactly.
So what can be done to counter the manosphere?
Well, Bates suggests challenging rigid gender stereotypes, supporting men's mental health, addressing male survivors of abuse, and the vital role of education for parents and teachers.
Right.
It's really a multifaceted approach,
Yeah.
addressing these underlying societal factors while also supporting vulnerable individuals.
Okay.
And Bates emphasizes the crucial role of men who actively challenge misogyny within a feminist framework.
Right. So it's not just a women's issue.
It's not just a women's issue.
It's everyone's issue.
It's everyone's issue.
And she also points out that boys encountering misogyny online often don't recognize it as hate.
Right, because you might see it as humor
Right.
or as just banter, but it's
Yeah.
still harmful.
Yeah.
And this highlights the urgent need for critical awareness and media literacy.
Absolutely.
Education is paramount in equipping young people with the skills to identify and critically evaluate the messages they encounter online.
Okay.
And Bates uses this really powerful analogy of the manosphere as a guinea worm, which spreads insidiously and requires a slow, deliberate effort to extract.
So it's like this parasite that burrows under the skin.
Exactly.
And it's not easy to get rid of.
It's not easy to get rid of.
And she notes the concerning lack of focus on misogynistic extremism in government counter-extremism strategies and mainstream media
Yeah.
compared to other forms of extremism.
Right. It's often overlooked.
Yeah, like we're not paying enough attention to it.
Not enough attention.
And finally, Bates underscores the responsibility of online platforms like YouTube to address algorithmic radicalization
Yeah.
and the spread of harmful content.
Absolutely. They have a responsibility to create safer online spaces
Right.
and to prevent the spread of this kind of hate.
So ultimately, countering the manosphere demands this sustained effort to challenge its ideologies.
Yes.
Educate individuals and create environments where these harmful beliefs are not allowed to take root.
We need to be proactive.
Yeah.
And we need to work together.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. In a world increasingly shaped by online ideologies,
Right.
how often do we critically examine our own potential exposure to or even unconscious acceptance of subtle forms of sexism?
That's a great question.
It's something to think about.
It is,
Because we may be participating in this without even realizing it.
Absolutely.
And I think ongoing critical self-reflection, both online and offline, might be more important than ever.
I agree. And this really invites us to consider our own roles in challenging harmful narratives.
Yeah.
And fostering more inclusive online and offline spaces.
Absolutely. So if you found this deep dive valuable, please subscribe to The Deep Dive for more in-depth explorations of complex issues.
We'd love to have you.
Share this episode with others who might find it insightful.
Spread the word.
For a deeper understanding, we encourage you to purchase Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates.
It's a fantastic book.
You'll find a link in the episode notes.
Yeah, check you out.
And most importantly, remember to think critically about the information you encounter both online and in the real world.
Absolutely be discerning.
Be discerning.
Question everything.
Question everything.
And don't be afraid to challenge harmful ideologies.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.